If I take you back to 1787, you have to feel the tension in the room with me, because the revolution had ended, yet the freedom was precarious. The Articles of Confederation, which were meant to hold the states together, were unraveling under their own weakness. Each state issued its own currency, levied taxes independently, and regulated trade according to self-interest, and often ignored the broader needs of fledgling union. Soldiers who fought for their independence returned home unpaid, farmers faced foreclosures, and ordinary citizens left the pressure of a government unstable to provide order and stability. Shays' rebellion was more of a local uprising. It was a vivid alarm that the fragile experiment of self-governance could collapse if power was not deliberately structured. I often think about James Madison, inconsistent in Federalist number 10. The ambition and self-interest are constant. In human behavior, left unchecked, they accumulate in ways that threaten liberty. That understanding was baked into every structural decision made in Philadelphia. Separation of powers, staggered elections, enumerated authorities, federalism, and deliberate systems of checks and balances were designed not to empower leaders, but to restrain them. Washington, sitting quietly at the head of the table, reminded everyone that government, like fire, is dangerous. Servant and fearful master, these words weren't abstract, they were grounded in lived experience. The chaos of the revolution and the fear of repeating the failures of the past republics, like Rome, the delegates understood deeply that the virtue alone could not preserve liberty. Without deliberate fraction built into the system, any government, no matter how well intended, would inevitably drift toward consolidation and tyranny. Large states worried that small states would be drowned out. Southern states warned that the northern commercial interests would dominate, and the northern states worried about the South's economy and its reliance on slavery. Every compromise carried the weight of survival, not theory. The resulting Constitution was a delicate balance between ambition and restraint, fear and hope, chaos and order. It was built to endure, not because the people or the leaders were perfect, but because the systems accounted for imperfection. Representation was designed not as a mirror of immediate public opinion, but as a filter, refining, enlarging, and moderating popular passions to prevent rash or faction-driven decisions. Madison assumed factions would emerge naturally in every society, and the system he helped design anticipated them, forcing compromise and dialogue. The Constitution did not guarantee efficiency, nor did it ever promise harmony. It promised survival, stability, and the slow, deliberate preservation of our freedoms. Federalism was central in this design, giving states the ability to govern locally and preserving accountability and preventing central authorities from concentrating power unchecked. Each state retained sovereignty over matters not explicitly delegated, ensuring the people's influence remained direct and observable. The Constitution's genius, in my eyes, lies its anticipation of failure, its assumptions of human imperfection, and its deliberate slowing of power to preserve our liberty. Even today, when we look at the government overreach, the bureaucratic entrenchment, or today our foreign dependency, we can see the very principles the founders feared being tested or ignored. Sovereignty, as they conceive it, was never a passive inheritance. It's an active, ongoing exercise of restraint, oversight, and vigilance. Okay. Now, when I talk about sovereignty, I have to be clear. The founders did not design a government to act quickly, decisively, or efficiently. They designed it to prevent power from concentrating, to restrain ambition, and to protect the liberty from both external and internal threats. James Madison, writing in Federalist number 51, explained that the ambition must be made to counteract the ambition, and he meant it, literally. Every mechanism in the Constitution anticipates human self-interest, assuming that unchecked desire or influence will inevitably arise. Hamilton argued that the government existed to harness energy and service the public, but that energy must be constrained by law, by checks, and by competing powers, because unchecked energy in the hands of even well-intentioned leaders lead to tyranny. Jefferson warned that liberty naturally yields as a government grows, and cautionary note that resonates today. We see it in the executive outreach, permanent bureaucracies, and laws so complex that ordinary citizens cannot navigate or challenge them. Every structural feature, the separation of powers in staggered terms, the bicameral legislature, the independent judiciary, and the federalist system. It was designed to create friction, slow decision-making, and force authority to justify itself repeatedly. Now, they assumed that the public's virtue alone could not sustain the freedom. Law representation was conceived not as a mirror of immediate public opinion, but as a filter refining, enlarging, and moderating popular passions to prevent the rash or faction-driven decisions. Even the compromise between the House and the Senate, and between the proportional representation and equal state representation, reflects this principle. Power must be distributed and checked to prevent domination by any single entity, region, or interest. I reflect on Washington's insistence that government must be a careful balance between power and restraint, and see it as a lesson we still fail to follow fully, because modern citizens often equate efficiency and responsiveness with freedom rather than the understanding that liberty requires friction. When we think about sovereignty, it is crucial. It's a crucial understanding that the founders feared not only internal consolidation of power, but also a subtle erosion from a foreign influence because of dependence, economic, militarily, or political, can quietly undermine self-determination. George Washington, in his farewell address, warned Americans against permanent alliances, not because he opposed diplomacy or trade, but because his entanglement with the foreign powers risk bending our decisions toward external priorities rather than domestic interests. Alexander Hamilton emphasized that economic reliance on other nations can translate directly into political dependence. When you borrow, trade, or rely on foreign nations for critical resources, your policy options are limited, your independence curtailed, and your sovereignty compromised. Jefferson saw debt as a particular form of a substantial bondage. When governments borrow beyond the means or accumulate obligation to external creditors, they surrender flexibility, compromise judgment, and invite external pressures and influence domestic policy. I reflect on these warnings and realize they are strikingly relevant today as global financial systems and trade dependencies and security alliances increasingly shape our national decision-making in the ways the public may barely notice. Excuse me. The founders were not isolationists, and they understood the value of trade diplomacy and strategic entanglement. They were, however, obsessively cautious about dependence that eroded judgment, autonomy, and freedom of action, because sovereignty is measured not by the ability to act under external pressure, but by the ability to decide without it. Madison warned that excessive attachment or enmity toward foreign powers warps political judgment, turning policy into a reflection of external pressures rather than the will of the people. In my view, these lessons are urgent now because international obligations, treaties, and global entanglements, while often framed as a necessity, carry the subtle risks of limiting options, influencing elections, and prioritizing foreign and domestic interests. True independence requires the courage to say no, the clarity to prioritize national interests over convenience or expedience, and the discipline to resist pressure even when it comes packaged as diplomacy, trade, or security. If foreign entanglements are the pressure from the outside, internal erosion is the slow, almost invisible rot from within, and the founders feared this form of tyranny more than armies because it often masquerades as a necessity or an expertise and efficiency. Madison warned that tyranny does not only come from the force, it can emerge when legislative, executive, and judicial powers concentrate or when temporary authorities become permanent regardless of intentions of those in office. Washington cautioned what encroachment tends to consolidate over time. Not because leaders are inherently malicious, but because opportunity aligns naturally with ambition, and once power becomes habitual, it's extremely difficult to roll back. The founders designed staggered elections, term limits, federalism, and separation of powers precisely to prevent stagnation, which is ensuring authority circulates and it is regularly tested against the public's oversight. Jefferson repeatedly stressed that the liberty requires constant vigilance, that citizens cannot abdicate responsibility to institutions even if that seem efficient, because when law becomes opaque and the authority becomes isolated, freedom silently erodes. Now, as we look at modern bureaucracies and permanent emergency powers, and I see the patterns the founders warned about, complex regulations, sprawling agencies, and directionary authorities accumulate over time, narrowing the room for citizen influence and creating a system that functions effectively without real accountability. Emergency powers designed as a temporary tool for crisis often extends indefinitely, becoming normalized and expanding authority in ways that were never intended. Taxes, surveillance, regulatory reach, all justified as necessary or pragmatic, can quietly centralize power, eroding decision-making, public oversight, and the very essence of self-governance. Jefferson's insistence that citizens must remain active participants in critical here inertia, disagreement, and passive compliance create fertile ground for authority to consolidate, making freedom theoretical rather than lived. All right. Now that we have examined the foundations of sovereignty and architecture or controlled power, the dangers of foreign entanglements, and slower erosion of internal authority, the question we face today is stark. How do we reclaim the vision of the founders in a world vastly more complex than 1787? Often reflected on Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, Washington, where I see a consistent theme. Liberty is never guaranteed, independence is never inherited, and sovereignty must be actively defended every generation, or it will quietly slip away. In the modern era, permanent bureaucracies, complex regularity systems, international dependencies, and normalized emergency powers test the limits of the original blueprint after prioritizing efficiency and convenience or expedience over accountability, deliberation, and citizen control. Reclaiming sovereignty begins with knowledge, understanding that the original intent of the Constitution, the fears in which freedom can erode, is the first and most essential step. Washington's insistence of that government is a dangerous servant and fearful master reminds us that the institutions themselves are neutral. It is the engagement, the vigilance, and the judgment of citizens that determines whether they protect liberty or erode it. If I take you back to... Alrighty, guys. Now, as we were discussing throughout this whole video today, I want to end with my outro, and it's a special one. So, as we draw this journey to a close, I want you to picture the faces in the Philadelphia Hall of 1787 and the exhaustion and the fear, the hope and the resolve etched into every line. They knew the freedom was fragile, that the independence was never guaranteed, and that the very experiment of self-governance could fail if vigilance waned. And yet they dared to imagine a country where liberty was preserved not by the whims of leaders or the convenience of power, but by a system designed to restrain ambition, to disperse authority, and make the people the ultimate guardians of their own destiny. Today, the threats have changed, shape, bureaucracy, global pressure, overreach, but the principles are timeless and the solution is the same. Awareness, engagement, courage, and relentless commitment to holding power accountable. We are mere spectators in this story. We're living it, and every choice we make, every vote, every act of civic responsibility either honors that vision or erodes it. The founders left us a blueprint, but they did not give us a guarantee. That guarantee comes from action, from refusing to let convenience, distraction, or fear allow freedom to slip silently away. Sovereignty is not symbolic, it's structural, civic, and personal. It exists in the institutions we engage in with communities we empower and the vigilance we maintain. It is not inherited, it is exercised, defended, and renewed by each generation that chooses to fight for it. As you step away from this episode, I challenge you to take the responsibility seriously, to question authority, to demand accountability, and engage logically and nationally, and to never forget that liberty we enjoy is not a birthright. It's a contract, a covenant, and a charge we must uphold. So let this be more than a reflection on the past. Let it be a call to arms for the present, a blueprint for the future, and a reminder that experiment began in 1787 is far from over. Every voice matters and every action counts, and every citizen has a role in steering the lifeboat of liberty through the storm of history. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and act boldly, and carry toward the vision of those who came before us. Because if we fail, freedom will fade quietly. But if we rise together, grounded in the principles of sovereignty, independence, and self-governance, we will not only honor the founders, we will become the architects of a freer, stronger, and more resilient America. And that is where I want to leave you, my friends. It's the work, the challenge, and the promise that lies before us. And I just want to thank you once again. This is the end of the video. And if you don't mind, please like, share, and subscribe. And again, thank you all for another awesome episode. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one.